We are super excited today, have a very special guest on named Deanne Fitzpatrick. And I'm going to toss this to Stephanie because Stephanie's been friends with her for a very long time and can tell us a little bit about Deanne and the amazing world she's going to unfold for us today.
Well, first of all, Deanne has been an impact in my life. And how she's been an impact is that she has got such intentionality. And what I mean by that is that she is really very intentionally wanting to make a difference in the world. And yet at the same time, can completely let go and surrender. And it's always been very magical to me. And so we talk a little bit in this podcast about her process of like, how do you do that? Because in our world, we're so conditioned to look at the outcome. Like, what have you produced? Or, what are your bottom line? Or, what does it look like to the outer world? And we neglect the internal, which is very private and it's very vulnerable. And sometimes even we ourselves, we don't know what that is. And so, having Deanne in my life has been such an evolving process for me of learning how and when, to create something or to let it go, and that we're all artists. And she's been a really great mentor for me. And it's just an absolute delight to have her on our podcast and be able to offer her process of how she looks at, everything in life as art, and that how you can look at whatever it is that you are wanting, to maybe come more in relationship with, to find your own process that is beautiful and true to you. So,
I love that. So, without further ado, let's get chatting with Deanne. In a world where achievements and accolades motivate us to do more and be more, we're often left wondering, is this really it?
Deep inside, you know there is more to life. You're ready to leave behind the old, push your way through, and claim the deeper life that's calling you.
That's where we excel.
We're your hosts, Stephanie Allen.
And Maren Oslak.
And this is the Soulful Leader Podcast.
Sit back and relax as we share the shortcuts we've uncovered to help you make shift happen.
hi, welcome to the Soulful Leader Podcast. I'm Stephanie, and I'm here with Maren and a wonderful guest, Deanne Fitzpatrick. And I just want to really welcome Deanne, and I'm really, really excited for us to be with her today as she is passionately creating, as she does all the time when I see her. And I just want to give you a little background of Deanne from myself. I met Deanne many, many years ago, and she has been quite an influence in my life in the way of presencing, you know, creating beauty, coming from a place from connected to spirit. That sometimes it isn't always the thing that we think we should be doing, but it's what we're being called to do, and the right thing to do. That's meant to unfold, and that we are beauty unveiling. And I've just been so touched with Deanne and how she has inspired me to step up and play a more beautiful game. And I say more beautiful because it isn't necessarily the bigger game, although that sometimes is what happens too, but it's more of beauty and connectedness and reason for being. So welcome, Deanne. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Maren, for having me. I'm so happy to be with you this afternoon. I was looking forward to it.
So, for those of you that are not watching this on YouTube and are listening to it in a podcast, Deanne is sitting and doing her rug hooking, which is what she is known for. And if you get a chance to pop over to YouTube and check that out, it's just an amazing process. And she's got this gorgeous rug that she had hooked, and it's behind her, and it's just such a lovely setting. And one of the things that Stephanie mentioned is being inspired by Deanne to create beauty. And Deanne, I believe that your tagline is create beauty every day. Can you
It
tell us
is.
about that?
Yeah. Well, it is a tagline, but I never think of it that way. I think of it as the way I live my life. So whether I'm walking around my house, I'm walking around my studio, I'm making a rug, that my job is to make it as beautiful as I can. And that it's not only really about making. I think beauty happens between people. It happens in relationships. It happens in the garden. It happens when you wave at someone, and as they're driving by. We can create beauty in a lot of different ways. And my goal in life is to make my life and the lives of the people that surround me as beautiful as I can. And I think that that's what when I teach rug hooking, because we do a lot of teaching online and sometimes in the studio, that's where I'm trying to bring them, not really to bring them to a hooked rug, because we can all get brought to a craft really easily, but to bring ourselves to the idea that beauty matters and it always will, then that's a whole other thing altogether.
I think about what a different world we would live in if everybody had that shift of heart of what would it be to make this moment beautiful, instead of I have to get through this moment, or I have to make this $1 million, or I have to do the next thing. It's like, okay, so if that's the case and those are true things, could I do it in a beautiful, what would it look like if I did it in a beautiful way?
Yeah. I think it's a good question.
And unique to each individual, because each individual has their own way of expressing their beauty.
Yeah.
And we see beauty differently.
Yeah.
We see and we understand beauty differently in our physical space, but also in our relationships and in who we're attracted to and what we're attracted to.
I think about that in terms of leadership and teams. And if everybody in a team were to think that way of how could I make this the most beautiful from my unique, like you said, Stephanie, from your unique perspective, how different that could be.
I think as in our world today, we get separated. Like, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, this is what beauty is, this is what it isn't. And it doesn't leave any space for our own uniqueness and our own unfolding. And I love how you are focused more on the inner process rather than the outer result. And I've always loved that, even though your outer results, like I was kind of joking before we started the recording. I said, okay, how many rugs have you made this week? Like, I can't even imagine. I am like not someone that I use my hands all the time, but I don't make rugs. And I think of, because it's not my skill set, or it's not where my interest is in that area to create, it would take me years to do what Deanne does. And yet I use my gifts and strengths in a totally different way. And I always am reminded of that. I think we forget our own uniqueness and our own expression. And so I just love that your inner expression, Deanne, actually results in a lot of outer things, but it isn't. It's like a reverse, isn't it? Can you tell us a little about your process, like how you come up with your ideas, or how you come up with?
Well, first of all, I think that if you focus on the process and you just get yourself lost in the process, and the process is the most important thing, then what happens as a result of that is just like a beautiful extra, right? So that's one thing. But my process is like this. I'm just going around living my life just like any other artist, and I'm taking in whatever I take in. Sometimes, reading, seeing, all the things, just like anybody else. But as an artist, I'm taking note of things. It's not always real intentional, but I'm taking note of what's around me. So I walk a lot and I'm watching what I'm seeing. I'm watching the seasons change. I'm watching how a particular plant changes from season to season, things like that. So I'm noticing the details and the small things. And then I sketch a bit. I can't even say I sketch a lot, but I sketch often. Like if you looked at the amount of sketchbooks I have over a career, you would see, 40 to 60. I don't even know how many sketchbooks, right? So it's not like I sit down and sketch every day, but if you do it, if it's just sort of somehow involved in your practice, like that you're taking note in some way, then over time it accumulates and it builds upon each other. each time, right? And then what my medium is rug making. So then what happens is I decide I'm making a rug. And when I first started, I used to use recycled cloth. Recycled wool cloth is really hard to find now. So I use any kind of cloth that, like any kind of wool cloth that I can get my hands on, but mostly I probably buy off the bolt, and I use a lot of yarns now too. And so what I do is I take linen or burlap and I draw a pattern on it or a design. A lot of my designs focus on nature and beauty and like a lot of landscapes and fields, but there's lots of abstract and there's lots of fun little things too, because I have kits and patterns. So we make kits and patterns. So I'm always looking for fun designs that will, get someone engaged for the first time. It could be a black-eyed Susan or something simple. And then I take my wool, I take my linen, I draw my design on with a marker, or you can use a pencil or a marker. And then I take my wool and I have a small hook with a wooden handle. It's kind of like a crochet hook. And I put my hook down and I pull up that piece of yarn loop by loop. And so the technique itself is easy. It's one stitch and you just repeat it over and over again. But it's what you can do with color and design. Mm. And it's what you can do with the first part that I told you about, processing your life, processing what's around you, taking note, and then putting that into design and bringing it forth in kind of a more tactile kind of way, as opposed to just sort of carrying it around in your head. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. To me, it sounds like you're not trying to figure out what you're going to create. You're being drawn in nature and what is beauty for you and from you, and then taking note of it and then building up kind of like a resource kit, you're pulling up a whole resource kit so that when you just know that you have enough and you sit down and then you pull from that and allow it unfolds itself. Is that what I love that.
That's how it happens for me. It's different for everybody. And, of course, I look at the work of other artists. I mean, there's all kinds of influences. You look at the work of other artists, you look at the work of nature, I read. And when I read, I see in pictures, and sometimes you just look at like the colors that, if you like, I remember walking on a beach one time and seeing like my next palette, just because it was all there in the beach rocks. Right. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing.
I love this because as healing as it is, because it's just as much healing. Like creating art is healing.
I think so.
Absolutely. And I know myself, like if I get stuck or stifled into something, and I'm trying to figure it out, I try to get into my head, it torments me and I can't do it. But if I let that go and like your process, my process is more about of creating as well, but in a different way of creating or talking to people and using my imagination and my hands in the way of feeling things, that I start to take note of also what I'm drawn to. And I'm relating this, and Maren, you must have a process too of like when you get stuck or stifled in different things. I love this because this is like process oriented and how we unveil our beauty in the way of being in this world.
Well, the two things that I was thinking about as Deanne was talking, one of them was that I think of you, Stephanie, as an artist with your hands, just like Deanne, except completely differently from Deanne, right? Because you create art in the way that you work with human beings. And if we can think of ourselves like that, so often, one of the things that I hear from people is, I'm not an artist. I'm not an artist. And then the minute you cut yourself off from that, now you cut yourself off from like the creativity and the beauty that comes through all of us in completely different ways. So claiming that you are an artist in your unique way, like we said earlier. So that was one of my thoughts. The other thought was when Deanne, you said, it's a simple process because I just do this same thing one stitch at a time over and over. And I think that that's one of the places where oftentimes we all get stuck. I know I do when you're asking about stuckness, is I see the entire picture in my head or what it could be. And I get overwhelmed by everything that it's going to take to create whatever I want to create, whether it's a business or a new team or a new product or a hooked rug. And I forget that it's just simply one step at a time. And most often, there's nothing revolutionary about any of the steps. It's just, what color do I bring to it? What, where do I put it next to this color? Do I put it next to that color? And so looking to artists like Deanne for a process, and realizing that there is a direct correlation to business or to a relationship or to anything that I want to manifest or start to create in my own life, that suddenly all of a sudden it's like, oh, I am an artist and I can use those techniques that they're talking about today.
Think about, like, people hate, like when you said about the whole thing being so big and the whole idea in my head and that kind of overwhelming me. I think about, like, when you dance, when you dance or when you're teaching people to dance, they spend time dancing, right? But they don't have like, at the end of it, they don't own a dance. They don't have a dance. They don't have something to bring home, you know? And I sort of like to think of making like that it's the time spent. It didn't necessarily, it does give you something, but if that something doesn't work out, it's just like you went dancing or you went for a walk or you went, we did any of the things that we do that don't turn into real things. And we have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to spend time on the ethereal, I guess, the things that aren't, we have to act like, we have to love it, but we have to love it so much that we're not trying to control it.
Oh, that's
We
key.
have to love it and we have to pay attention to it and be good to it, but we can't try and own it, we just got to show up and make it. That's what I think art is for me anyway.
I think you just got both of us to go, oh, that's it.
Yeah. I mean, that's life, right?
Yeah.
Is we have to show up fully present, do everything that we can do, and then we actually don't own any of it. We don't own the people we're in relationship with. We don't own, it's like I say, I own my business. And even with that, I need to surrender what that could look like. Because when I get attached to what it looks like, all that does is cause stress and anxiety inside of me, right?
Yeah. And like, you can own your business, but I don't own the people that work with me in this business.
Right.
I don't own the customers who are part of it. So you just kind of, you own that like piece of paper, I guess, but you don't really, I don't know. Ownership is a kind of funny thing. That's a really interesting point that you brought up there, Maren. I like that because I own it, but I couldn't run this business. Like, I have an art business, right? I'm an artist and I have a business that is developed from this art, but I couldn't run this business by myself. So I don't really, it's interesting, you just kind of owning it is just kind of it's just an idea, really.
It's a relationship. It's a relationship.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I don't own a partner, but I'm in a relationship with them,
Yeah.
or, and that is also a dance, and that's also an art. And it requires an element of surrender and allowing what wants to happen too. And how do I show up to that?
Right.
Business in itself is a kind of an art, I think. Like, a
very
good
much
business
so.
is run creatively, and that's what makes it a beautiful thing and an interesting thing, right? And so when people say they're not creative, I just know that they're not really thinking about creativity in the same way that I do, because life is a creative act, right? It's definitely and absolutely is, to get up in the morning, to make choices, to decide what to wear, to bring things into your home. And, some people use their creative muscles more and they're more attentive and aware of them. But that's all it is. We all have the same muscles. Some people have oodles of talent and it just comes to them more easily. But most people have a general amount of talent, and most artists, I think, have a general amount of talent and work at it really hard to bring forth beauty. I think.
Yeah, there's the element of practice, right? Like to keep
Yes.
practicing it and developing that art muscle. And like I said, it doesn't mean that you aren't, maybe you're listening and you're thinking, well, I don't create anything. I don't create rugs or paintings or pictures and it's like, but you create a life and that's
Yeah.
art. And you
Yeah.
create a business
Yeah.
and that's art. Like
And
it
your
is,
home
yeah. Oh my
and family,
gosh.
like
Language to
yeah, it's
everything.
all, it's all done with great intention and purpose. And there is a lot of process to all of those things. There's a lot of waiting, you know?
I think where we get into trouble is going back to the control piece is when we do try and control, when we try and control the people in our teams or what something will look like, or it's like we have a certain amount that we bring to it, and then when we try and control all the aspects, that's where it will melt down and it will break down and it will cause strife between you and other people or in your business. Because like when you were talking about your business as an art and you couldn't do it by yourself, you're not trying to control the people who work with you. You're not trying to control your customers. And I see a lot of businesses not only who do that, but who actually think that that is the way to do business. And I think that one of the things that Stephanie and I are working with here is shifting that mindset to one of what if you respected the people you worked with and empowered them to bring what they have to the table, their art? And what if you respected your customers and offered them something and didn't manipulate and control that? Right. So it's a different paradigm and that's where I think taking it back to the beginning where we were talking about creating beauty every day. What would it be like to show up to your business, to your home, to your partner from a place of I'm creating art?
Hmm. Yeah, it would change everything.
It would change
It would
everything.
change. I mean, not everything for everybody, but it would change a lot. And I think art has, to me, art has a lot to do with intention, and it has a lot to do with letting go. So it would be trying to balance those things in our homes and in our life and in our family.
Yeah, I love that because what I hear is intention is the yang and letting go is the yin. So it is that balance of the yin and the yang, right?
Can you tell me more, Deanne? I love
Yeah.
that. The intention, absolutely. The intention and letting go.
So
So what do you do to be more
I
skillful
start
in
out,
those? Yeah.
I start out with an idea, like a piece of art in my head, right? And I start making it,
So
and
you get it like an inspiration or
I
something?
get
Like you
some
get,
idea. I think,
okay.
oh, wouldn't that be beautiful? Oh, like like the one behind me, I never saw that the way it looks now. I saw it differently. And one of the things that I learned when I'm teaching people, I mostly teach online now, but one of the things that keeps coming up is that I can't get it to look like the way I want it to look.
So there's the
And
control, right?
there it is, right? And I know what that feels like because, I was a young artist too, and I felt many of the same things, and I couldn't get it to look the way I wanted it to look. But
I felt
sometimes
that way about my business.
I do too sometimes. I can't get it to the way I want it to look. Okay, you can't get it the way you want it to look.
Mhm.
But sometimes we just have to accept like that the way you wanted it to look was really beautiful. But the way it looks when you let it go and just let it happen is way more beautiful. That's a possibility. There is that other possibility is that it's not as nice, right? But that's the 1,000 hours, that they're not always going to be right. But if you can just sort of let go and, like, I'm still making a rug. Even right now, I'm making a rug that I made almost 28 years ago that didn't come out the way that I want it. You know? So I keep coming back to the frame with intention of that, and the knowledge of that. And it came out to be something else altogether that was okay. It, it was never really beautiful. But so often I've made rugs that came out that are more beautiful than the image I initially had in my head. Because throughout the process, I was able to get lost in it, and I was able to respond to, the piece of wool that landed on my frame, or the idea that came in my head because I was listening to a podcast, or because I saw a rock on the way to work, or, and just, I would let myself to respond to the moment. I'm doing it even right now as we talk, you just sort of, no, I hope it makes sense.
It does. And what I'm hearing is that there is a difference between practice and inspiration. And the thing I think a lot of times when we think of artists is we think of natural, oh, they're just naturally talented. They just do that without effort and they're inspired, and I can't do that. And I love what you're talking about of, the 10,000 hours of most artists. They do a lot of crappy work. Right?
Yeah,
They don't just
even
like don't come out of the womb just doing perfect stuff. I mean, yes, there are the people like Beethoven or somebody like that who came in, naturally talented. I love what you said earlier is most artists are not naturally talented. They have a certain amount of talent, and then they work really hard. And when, for all of us, remembering that when we put our time in, things get better. When we put the
yeah,
practice in, it
yeah,
gets better. And so where you are now with the 10,000 hours of actually rug hooking, and the effort and the 10,000 hours that you've probably put into being present to that muse that happens, it's not just, oh, I'm going to sit here and it's going to happen to me. You actually put practice into being able to listen to that muse when it shows up and
yeah,
surrender to it.
yeah, you do. You pay attention and you listen, and you sacrifice what it was that you originally wanted to get something completely different, which isn't what you wanted, but can be very good. And the one thing I do want to say about really famous artists, like, I think of really famous artists. Oh, like, I don't like any famous artist. I don't want to pick one. But when we look at the work that we see of theirs, even if it's a book full, most, like, if it's a whole book full of, with 100 plates of beautiful paintings, or it's a book full of beautiful songs, that, well, first of all, in that book, everything isn't as beautiful as everything else. There are often like a few really amazing masterpieces that we know that artist for. Like, and some of us know a certain artist for different things, but I think of well, for example, we think of Van Gogh, many of us think of Starry Night or whatever, but there were thousands and thousands of paintings
Right.
beyond that. And there are tons that are undocumented that we know nothing about. There were so many early sketches, and that's true for every artist. I think that they're just not an outpouring of masterpieces in a life. I talked to a couple of artists one day, and I said to them, both had been at it about 30 years. And I said, when you look back over your years of work, what are the pieces, like, how many are the pieces that really stand out? And they both said 6 or 7. One said, I can count them on one hand. Now, they've
Wow.
made thousands, right? And so, like, I just sort of remember that. And it's interesting. Like, I have a couple of rugs here now, and one of the guys who works with me, he said, I think that rug is like part of your life's work, right? Like, that's a memorable piece. And I'm thinking, maybe, but I don't know. he doesn't know really either, but for him, that is one of them, you know. For me, I can think of a few pieces that really, really are memorable. And that doesn't mean that other work isn't good. It's lots of it is good and lots of it is beautiful, but we can't set out. You're not going to know when you're making that one decision or that one piece of art or that one thing in your home that's going to make all the difference. We don't know that when it's happening very often.
I think
Very.
what you're saying too is so key, because again, letting go, like surrendering that ego of what you think it should look like or what you want it to be, instead of doing it for the process of doing it. And I'm making that relationship of like what you had just shared with all of the artists, how many practice hours, how many things that they've put out there. And yet there's probably only a key things that many of us even remember of them, or that they even remember themselves. And I'm relating this to whether you're in business or in relationship, of like how many times it doesn't turn out the way we want it to turn out. And we beat ourselves up about it, instead of remembering how these artists kept going because it was something that they were in love with. It was,
Mhm.
they were in that stream of consciousness to allow it to keep unfolding and to keep working with it and to keep. So I was going to ask you, because I think you've already said it, but if you can even say it again, what is it that keeps you going? Because it isn't the outer. And that's what I'm hearing. It's not necessarily the outer creation of something is really lovely, but what is the internal, if you can name it? What do you say to yourself? Or
Well, it's beauty, I think, that I'm always trying to make something, like I'm always trying to make a rug that's better than anything I've ever made before. But it's also, Stephanie, that I like the process.
that's where I was going.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you
So
love
it's,
it. You love
yeah,
the
I love
unfolding
the
of it.
process. I love the sound that it makes. I love the way wool, like people say, oh, why don't you hook with t-shirts? You know, I love the way wool feels in my hand. I love the quality of wool. I love that it's a natural fiber. I don't want to hook with, you know, polyester jersey. I want everything. I want it to be real and feel. And I love that sometimes I can take an idea. I think the other thing that, to be quite honest, that really keeps me going is that it's an opportunity to express ideas. And ideas are beautiful. Like to me, there's very little that's more beautiful than an idea. An idea is a beautiful thing because it starts here and it can end up anywhere for all kinds of different reasons. And so this art in general allows me to express ideas. And I think that is one of the things that has kept me going.
I love it.
I do too. And I think in particular, what you were just talking about, what struck me is that you're doing it for you. And so much of what we're trained to do or that we think we should do is for other people. And going back to the control thing, we can't control other people. We can't make them happy. We can't do anything for somebody else. All we can do is our own life mission, what we're here for. And getting so in touch with that it lights us up every day. And we want to do what we're doing so much that it lights up the people around us. That's what when I met you, Deanne, that's what I felt from you. And I love that. And that's what inspires me and makes me want to dig deeper inside and really find that for myself of what can I do for myself to be so lit up that I light up all the people around me.
Oh, thank you. That's nice. Yeah. That's a good question to ask.
Yeah, that's our life mission question. Why are we here, right?
Yeah.
I remember years ago when I first started getting into, therapy and doing body work. And this is 30 years ago. And, many people would come to me and they say, oh, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could touch people's stinky feet and hairy backs and things like that. And, or someone else would say to me, oh, well, that must be really good money, or, you can make so much money in an hour. And I'm like, none of those were the reasons that I went into it. And I love what you said about the process, because it was the process that I loved. I loved falling in love with what I was doing. Like that whole, like doing something over and over and over again. If you don't love it, you're not going to keep doing it. It's going to create stress. It's not going to create beauty. And I think that's a crucial element in our lives, whether, like I said, whether it's with yourself, like I think of working out. If I don't like to move my body, I
Hmm.
am not going to go and want to go for a walk,
No.
or I'm not going to want to do it. But if I focus on, oh my God, it's so beautiful out. Look at the trees with the ice on it, or the sunrise, or
Mhm.
listening to the sound of the water, the wind, and the birds. And if I start focusing on the things and all of a sudden I'm moving, it's a completely different experience. And I
Yeah.
think that's what I'm hearing from you too, is falling in love with the process. And the outer outcome is going to be beautiful, more beautiful than you ever even imagined it, if we can let it go that way.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
So that, go ahead.
I was thinking about like starting with an inspiration of what I want an outcome to be is wonderful and perfectly acceptable and like lovely. Like, say for example, going for a walk, if I want to get into better shape, right?
Yeah.
So that's my outcome and I want that. And we've talked about asking the why behind that. And and in order for me to keep up with whatever it is that I want to do in order to get into shape, I then have to fall in love with that process. So again, we're talking about the intention and the surrender, right? So there are both aspects to that of I do want an outer outcome, and I can't just focus on that outer outcome, because I guess I can, and that's what our current world kind of promotes, is focus on the outcome, outer outcome, and do anything that it takes, everything that it takes at all costs to get there. And the cost ends up being me or my relationships, or like all of the damage that it does. So if we have the outer outcome and we start looking at what's the inner that would make me happy, what's the how can I create that in a beautiful way? They're going back to our creating beauty. Now I have both aspects, and now I'm in that balanced place, and then I can create my process, right? Like, oh, I found like the stuff that Stephanie was just talking about of I found that I love walking because I love beauty in the nature, or I found that I love playing basketball because I love the athleticism, or whatever it is,
Mhm.
my process.
I like art is, we talked about it earlier, but art is a metaphor for life, right? All the
Yes.
time. Like everything when I start talking about life, I think, oh, that's just like when I put this in here and it doesn't work out right and I take it out and I try something. So art, there's all kinds of metaphors in art for life. And one of the things I think about is when I think about um, one of the things I guess I'm worried about is the pressure that people sometimes feel to live a beautiful life. And I I sometimes think that we that it isn't always easy to, because there's so many practical demands on a life, right? And I just I just want to say that even just bringing beauty into your life in tiny ways. So if you have a job that you need to have, but you don't love it, just finding other things that you do love and bringing those into your life, or that you can't make that enormous change that you want to make for all kinds of reasons. I've known people who have been in relationships that sometimes were not the right relationships, but they remained for all kinds of reasons. And I just want to say that I think that finding that one little bit of creative joy can enhance whatever it is that you're dealing with. And perhaps that might be meditation, it might be walking, it might be rug hooking, it might be painting or whatever. But that inside all of us, I like to say, we were made and we are makers. And because we were made, we have it in us to be makers, and that we can make our lives a little bit more beautiful, a little bit more interesting in just small ways. It doesn't have to be transformative. It can just be it can be laying a shell on your desk and paying attention to the shell, you know. It can be accepting, like I have a moon snail in my house. I was looking at it the other day that a little girl gave me when she was 8 years old. And that adds as much beauty to my home as does an amazing rug, right? And because she found this one huge moon snail and passed it to me with a big smile, you know, and that we can work in small ways to change our lives for the better.
I love
So it
that.
doesn't have to be an incredible task. That's all. I just
I
want to say
love
it.
that. I so appreciate your saying that. And I think it gives me freedom and probably all of our listeners freedom. It just is very empowering.
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, Deanne, can you let us know if somebody is interested in finding out more about you or your rug hooking or any of the things that you're doing? How do we get in touch with you, or where do we find you?
It's so easy. It's hookingrugs.com. That's my website. And from there, I think the best way to know what I'm about is I write these things called Sunday letters. And on Sunday, every Sunday, we send out a newsletter. We send them out through the week, and we'll try and get you rug hooking, and we'll send you like ads for kits. I just want you to know. But you can unsubscribe at any time. But to join our newsletter list, and you get the Sunday letter. And in the Sunday letter, I just sort of reflect on all the kinds of things that we were talking about today. I reflect on life, and I reflect on art and the metaphor of art and life. And I talk about rug hooking, and I show you what we do. But we are all in all the regular places like Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all of that. But I think if you want to really see what we're doing, go to hookingrugs.com. And there's all kinds. We do a live every Thursday. And under lives, you can see all these videos that we've created. We've got a nice team here that works together, and we have a lot of fun, a lot of joy.
I can attest to that because I have my office upstairs above Deanne, and there's oodles of laughter and music and jokes, and it's absolutely a blessing to be having that underneath me as a foundation. So
That's
I can
good.
attest to that.
It was really fun talking to you guys. Thank you.
It has been an absolute pleasure. And as I said before, you inspire me. And for all of our listeners, please do reach out and check out everything that Deanne is doing and get inspired yourself. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I was happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deanne.
See ya.
And that wraps up another episode of the Soulful Leader podcast with your hosts, Stephanie Allen
And Maren Oslack. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to dive deeper, head over to our website at thesoulfulleaderpodcast.com.
Until next time.